Meth has been a problem in Portland for years, but now there's a new version of the drug on our streets.
It's more addictive. It's causing more paranoia.
And those with lived experience say it's everywhere.
Like, how easy is it to get a hold of?
Oh, super easy. You can get it almost on any block.
What we're seeing on the streets of Portland and around Oregon, and quite frankly around the nation, is super pure, super potent, super cheap, and plentiful meth everywhere.
And even though you can't get convicted by a non-unanimous jury in Oregon anymore, there's still a big problem. What to do with all the people already in prison convicted that way?
Enough is enough from our perspective. A justice delayed is justice denied.
Here's the story.
Hey everybody, I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story, the show where if you're not familiar, your questions and your comments drive the coverage. And you might have seen we're going to be 2 nights into, in a couple of minutes, a 3-night series that a lot of you asked us to shine a light on. And that's just frankly how this show works. So email us at thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag #TheStoryKGW. Our team is listening as we speak. So that in mind, let's get started. All right, tonight's big story is night 2 on Portland's meth crisis. And when you all emailed us about this, we decided to really dig in. We went out onto the streets in downtown Portland to talk to the people who know the meth situation the best. Those are the people who used it for years. And last night, you might have seen, we introduced you to 3 men, Kenneth, Nick, and Eddie. All 3, we want to note, are housed right now. They are all sober and they are all working cleaning the streets of downtown with the nonprofit Central City Concern. But for years, all 3 were living on Portland streets addicted to meth. Particularly, at least for some, a new version of meth, or at least newly popular. It's called P2P meth, and The Atlantic wrote this piece about it. Experts say it's more lethal and it causes extreme psychosis almost immediately. And perhaps more importantly for you at home, experts also say this quote-unquote new meth is absolutely here, wreaking havoc in Portland. And it has been here, they say, for nearly a decade. And a note, this piece was written by KGW producer Ashley Koch.
We're hearing about Portland's meth crisis from the people who experience it firsthand.
Downtown is a smorgasbord of drugs.
Kenneth, Eddie, and Nick each spent time living in tents on Portland streets and getting high on meth.
I started at 9 years old.
For me, I felt like I needed meth to survive, and it just made everything easier, made life easier for me. And looking back at it now, it just made everything worse, way worse.
They've seen what it does to other people.
We see people arguing with nobody, wanting to fight with nobody on the street right there. You know, but that person's really there to them.
And they've felt what it does to themselves.
On February 27th at 9:07 a.m., I was shot in the chest and left for dead. And, you know, that's where drugs led me. Rodney!
Each of the men we talked to has seen a different version of meth gain momentum.
It was extremely stronger. It was more potent. Like a $20 bag would last you 4 or 5 days. Today, a $20 bag will last you 4 to 10 minutes.
It's cheaper, it's more potent, and it's easy to find.
How easy is it to get a hold of?
Oh, super easy. You can get it almost on any block. I mean, seriously.
Former Lincoln County District Attorney Rob Bovitt agrees.
What we're seeing on the streets of Portland and around Oregon, and quite frankly around the nation, is super pure, super potent, super cheap, and plentiful meth everywhere.
This isn't your garage meth lab with drugs cooked from Sudafed. Lawmakers actually spent years cracking down on that and made it harder to get.
Most of the meth has always come from the drug trafficking organizations. In the 90s and the early 2000s, they were largely cooking it in super labs in Central California and in Mexico. Now they're producing it all almost exclusively in Mexico using the older P2P process.
So drug traffickers adapted, switching from using pseudoephedrine to using industrial chemicals on an industrial scale process. They refined an old method called P2P meth that had been popular with biker gangs in the past.
It's really not new meth. It's old meth.
The precursors, or the ingredients to this kind of meth, are easy for drug traffickers to get.
They are industrial chemicals made in bulk and sold either on the licit or illicit market to the drug trafficking organizations that then do the super labs and produce the mass quantities of pure meth.
The meth they make is easy to bring into the U.S. It's flooded the streets in Portland, the rest of Oregon, and the rest of the country.
How easy are drugs to get in Portland?
Extremely easy.
The P2P method produces meth that is very strong. So strong it makes the user paranoid, sometimes even violent, something Eddie Breedwell has experienced for himself.
It had me hearing people talking that wasn't even talking, but I could hear them in my head, and they were all cops. I sat in the park for 3 hours, afraid to move off a park bench, because I thought as soon as I got up and started walking that they were going to get me.
What would have happened if someone had approached you at that moment?
I would have probably freaked out and probably got violent.
The other men say they've seen people high on meth acting the same way.
We get a lot of people thinking that you're talking to them and you're not talking to them, but they get violent about it. It's more addictive. It's causing more paranoia.
Based on their observations, they estimate the majority of people on Portland streets are indeed using meth.
If I were to guess, I'd probably say almost everybody. And it's really sad to say that, but it's true.
It's cold. You know, you don't know where your next dollar's coming from. And, you know, the drug world's big. It's easy to get high.
Kenneth, a gun violence survivor, believes meth is also playing a big part in the violence in Portland.
Gunshots are going off down here left and right. You know, there's areas that we don't even go to because it's too dangerous.
And it's burdening healthcare systems.
The folks that are getting addicted, folks that are going into or need to go into treatment, folks that are suffering from meth psychosis and other behavioral health issues driven by meth addiction. We're seeing spikes in the state hospital. We're seeing all of these side effects play out on the street and in our systems as a result of really super potent, super pure meth everywhere.
These three men were able to get out of the drug world, and they want other users to know it's possible for them too.
The one thing that I see a lot of is judgment. You know, just what I do out here is when I see somebody in distress, somebody that's having a hard time with being, you know, addicted to drugs, being homeless, I tell them my story. I let them know, hey, you know, I was just like you, February 27th, I was just like you. You know, I was right where you were. And, you know, I got shot and I made a choice to make a phone call and get a job.
But in the bigger picture, for the meth problem,
my real concerns are that this is probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Our thanks again on night 2 to Central City Concern, and again to Kenneth, Nick, and Eddie for being so open. And by the way, tomorrow we're going to wrap up coverage of Portland's meth crisis with thoughts from our interviewees with their lived experience as to what the city should do to actually address this issue and help people suffering from addiction on Portland streets. In the meantime, let's shift now to a blast from the past. Oregon's non-unanimous jury law, which we should note is now extinct. But for decades, under this law, a person in Oregon could get convicted of most crimes via a split jury. In other words, instead of needing 12 out of 12 jurors to get on board for a guilty verdict, lawmakers lowered the bar to 10 out of 12. And for years, we were the only state in the country where that was still allowed. That is, until last year, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that law unconstitutional. The thing is, the reason that we're talking about this tonight is that the mess created by, again, that now extinct law still lingers because there are a lot of people still in prison who were put there by split juries. And this has become something of a legal mess because of things like problem number 1. We don't know who a lot of these people are. I'll let Lewis and Clark law professor Eliza Kaplan explain.
For more than the 85 years that we had non-unanimous juries here in Oregon, we had no mechanism to count them or to ensure that we even knew if people had non-unanimous juries. The only way we know if people had non-unanimous juries over the years is if their lawyer or if for some reason the judge asked for the jury to be polled. and then put it on the record or wrote it on the verdict sheet. And so there are tons of people likely that were imprisoned in Oregon that had a non-unanimous jury and they didn't even know.
Okay. So what about people then who do have proof and do know that they were convicted by a non-unanimous jury? Well, there is another issue in those cases, because if someone is still going through the appeals process, they can then show proof of a split jury verdict and they can get a new trial. A group called the Ramos Project says there are 427 cases in Oregon where that's already happened or where it's in the process of happening. But the thing is, if a person has exhausted all of their appeals, they cannot get a new trial just with proof of a non-unanimous conviction. The Ramos Project says there are at least 244 cases in Oregon like that, where basically people are stuck in limbo. So they are trying to get Oregon lawmakers to change that. In fact, during a hearing yesterday, they proposed a bill that would let people who fall into this category get a new trial. This is as long as they file their claim within 1 year of if and when this legislation gets passed. So they'd have to do it soon. However, the Oregon District Attorneys Association also testified at this hearing about how difficult it would be to retry all of these old cases.
Sometimes people have moved when we're trying to find our witnesses, they've moved, officers have retired, we're trying to find them, they live out of state, people's memories have faded. So, sometimes we can refresh their memories. Sometimes, they don't really recall, exactly, because they've sort of put this behind them. And victims are, sometimes and oftentimes seriously traumatized by the process, especially in these child sex abuse cases or sexual assault cases.
Now, we do want to note again, there isn't any actual legislation yet. There was just a proposal. You saw that bill. And the state legislature doesn't actually formally meet to start voting on bills until February. So we'll absolutely keep you posted on where this debate goes next.
A lot of critics say Oregon's non-unanimous jury law was a holdover from Jim Crow-era racism. So how did we get here? Well, we've got to go all the way back to 1933, when a Jewish man named Jacob Silverman faced murder charges in Oregon. 11 jurors were ready to convict, but one wasn't. So as a kind of compromise, they convicted Silverman of manslaughter instead of murder, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. A lot of people thought his sentence was too light, including the editorial board of the Morning Oregonian. In November 1933, they published a, frankly, racist editorial. They wrote, "This newspaper's opinion is that the increased urbanization of American life and the vast immigration into America from Southern and Eastern Europe of people untrained in the jury system have combined to make the jury of 12 increasingly unwieldy and unsatisfactory." Oregon lawmakers heard the outrage, and a special election was held a year later in 1934. Voters approved a change in the Constitution, making it so only 10 of 12 were needed to convict somebody, except in cases of first-degree murder. That charge still needed to be unanimous. Supporters framed this change as a way of reducing congestion in the courts and saving tax dollars. Fast forward to 2020, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled non-unanimous jury convictions unconstitutional. It's worth noting, at the time, Oregon was the only state in the country where these convictions were still allowed. And that's how we got here. How many of you like to dine on crab and salmon freshly caught off our coast? Well, due to climate change, those could go away, and Oregon's new seafood delicacy could be calamari.
We're still looking at nearly half the ocean being different from the ocean we know of the last 50 years.
So get ready to start fishing for squid when the story continues.
Hey, welcome back. Keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com. Use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. You guys get it. You're really good at that, and we appreciate it. I mean, by this point, I feel like we all know the drill. That being said, a lot of people are buzzing about the Netflix show Squid Game right now. And quite frankly, this next story has nothing to do with Netflix, but we wanted something non-devastating to start off this story about climate change. So here we are. We're reaching. We apologize. Here's the gist. Researchers say our warming climate is on the brink of changing the food we can find off of Oregon's coast. So in other words, say so long, soon at least, to crab and get ready for more squid. There's the connection. Here's Keely Chalmers.
When you think of the Oregon coast, a certain picture likely comes to mind. Perhaps a memory of a childhood trip or that tasty Dungeness crab you caught. Well, hold on to those memories tight, because according to scientists, that's all about to change.
We realize that there is no option. Some parts of the oceans are going extinct.
Oregon State University researcher James Watson and former OSU researcher Stephen Johnson analyzed 50 years of ocean data and numerous climate models to see how ocean conditions will change as the climate warms. They found they will change dramatically despite efforts to curb climate change.
Given all of the commitments countries have made, we're still looking at nearly half the ocean being different from the ocean we know of the last 50 years.
The scientists found that 60 to 87% of the ocean is expected to experience multiple biological and chemical changes, such as increases in water temperature, higher levels of acidity, and changes in oxygen levels by the year 2060. And the rate of change is expected to be even greater in designated marine protected areas. In other words, efforts to protect sea life in those protected areas won't be enough. They say two scenarios will likely play out.
Organisms, species, the species that we fish, the species that we might love, they can adapt in two ways. They can either move or they can evolve.
And new species will move in.
And squid is typically caught down in California and down in Mexico too, but now it's being caught more and more up at higher latitudes, so up in Oregon now. Okay, so we're seeing species shift in response to warming conditions.
Those changes will also have cultural and economic impacts on those whose livelihoods depend on ocean resources. But the researchers say it's not all just doom and gloom. Knowing there will be changes will help us better adapt to something we cannot avoid.
Mitigation is a bit in the rearview window, right? That there's going to be some type of climate change happening. Is it going to be bad, worse, or the worst, like along that spectrum? And I think the way we mitigate that is by acting on the knowledge that we do have.
Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
Okay, let's talk now about another consequence of climate change, one that unfortunately we are all too familiar with in this part of the country, and that's wildfires. People living in the Santiam Canyon are still trying to recover from the devastating fires that tore through their homes in September of 2020. Today, wildfire survivors met with a group called After the Fire. That group formed in California after the North Bay fires in 2017. And now they're trying to help other communities like the Santiam Canyon with their recoveries. Christine Pitawanich was at that meeting, and I talked to her about it earlier.
Okay, Christine Pitawanich joining us now from Staten today. So Christine, let's talk about this meeting. This seems like it could be really helpful in terms of fire recovery.
Yeah, Maggie, I would say it was definitely very helpful in terms of establishing relationships between people from different communities, but also wildfire survivors. They ended up here after the tour at Santiam Hospital in Staten. They ended with a round table where they really, sat down, talked about ideas and ways to move forward.
And speaking of which, did they kind of, zero in on any ideas in particular that you noticed?
Well, I think this is a work in progress, right? Just continuing to come up with ideas. But one idea was mainly focused on if a fire were to happen again. So having a point of contact in the community. So a community might have a number of people who were assigned as contacts, as people who attend all of the meetings, so that, the people in their communities know who to reach out to. They'll contact these point people, and then these point people can then go to state agencies or public sector folks, businesses, anybody who's trying to get involved in recovery and tell them what's working, what's not. Another idea was that, some of these communities might want to establish relationships with indigenous communities, talking about how to care for our forests and try to prevent wildfires in the future.
Gotcha. And then I do want to ask, final question. You've been doing an incredible job of covering this story since the fires, and you've kept in touch with people since we were down there covering the fires as they were happening. So I'm just curious, in your mind, how is the recovery going at this point?
You know, I think there are a lot of people in varying stages of recovery. I mean, there are folks who are almost entirely rebuilt. They've got roofs and windows on their homes. Then there are people who are still working to try to get rid of trees that are burned and dead on their property, debris, trying to remove that. I think that's part of the difficult part in addressing the recovery, because there are so many people in all sorts of different stages of it. But I mean, I think what we do know, especially after looking at some of the other communities in California and Oregon even, that have gone through these types of wildfires and this type of destruction, is that there is still a long road ahead.
Definitely. And our hearts are still with them. Christine Pitawanich, again, awesome reporting throughout this process. We really appreciate the perspective from Staten today. Thank you.
The whole thing, this whole process only takes me about 10, 15 minutes.
Let's pivot a little bit and lighten things up, shall we? The show goes on, even when the performer turns 91. Yeah, we're celebrating Darcel with a trip into the KGW Vault when the story continues. I'm so excited for this next story. Welcome back, guys. It is a Portland icon's birthday today. Darcel, the queen herself, the world's oldest drag queen, actually, is turning 91 years old. Happy birthday to her. So to celebrate, let's dig into the KGW Vault for a look back at her incredible career.
The whole thing, this whole process only takes me about 10, 15 minutes. These eyebrows were a trademark that I started a few years ago. And now, and I'm the only one that I know of that uses them. They asked Darcel what are you going to wear for Halloween, and I always tell them a three-piece business suit, you know, because I get to do this all year long.
Everything about it is appealing. Everything the traffic will allow.
This is a milestone for Walter Cole. It's his 20th anniversary of dressing up as Darcel at his Northwest Portland nightclub.
Roxy and Tina have been with me we started together 20 years ago. So that's three of us. Lindsay is the new one, right next to me over here.
Hi.
And Laurel's been, what, 10 years now?
My 11th.
11th year.
Oh my goodness.
So we do get along. There.
Where did those come from? There's people are always asking.
See, and there it is, finished. One more time. Herb, why don't you bring my jewelry over and my wig? It is a absolute dedicated craft, because when 8:30 arrives, you're ready.
It's showtime. You can do this for 20 years. And before that curtain comes up, your nerves are just as tight as if it was with the first night you ever worked. It's an amazing thing with performers. I suppose when the butterflies stop, the adrenaline isn't correct. You know what I don't have? I don't have my boobs. I've got an...
That night you opened, and there you are.
Very much. Listen, if we haven't met, the name's Darcel, hair by Jacuzzi, face by Max Factor, and the body by Sarah Lee.
After 10,000 shows over 2 decades in costume and face paint, Darcel says he's headed for 20 more years, even if they have to help him into his pantyhose to get him on stage.
Let's go on with the show.
Ann Jagger, News 8.
We covered so much tonight, a lot of serious topics, but I really do want to know what you thought of Darcel. That was an amazing story. We were just trying to figure out, I think it was from the 80s. It was really cool. Follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW or email thestory@kgw.com. With that being said, that is the end of the show. Laurel Porter is standing by for the news at 6:30. Hey, Laurel.
Hi, Maggie. Tonight we're hearing from the mother of a shooting victim, still hoping her son's killer will be caught. The news at 6:30 starts now.